You know, when we talk about the 2002 Gujarat riots, we're really talking about two completely different stories that just don't line up. First, you have this story told by survivors, by witnesses, and on shocking undercover tapes, a story of targeted, organized violence where the state was allegedly involved. And then you have the official story, the one told in government reports and courtrooms, a story of spontaneous riots that simply overwhelmed the state. This explainer, well, it's about the massive gap between those two truths. So let's start with what happened on the ground. And it really begins with this number. According to the official count, 1,044 people lost their lives. 790 of them were Muslim, and 254 were Hindu. We're talking about one of the most violent periods of communal conflict in modern Indian history, and it all happened in just a few absolutely terrifying days. And that's the big question, isn't it? The violence was everywhere. It was on TV, thousands of people saw it with their own eyes. So why, after 2 decades, does a real sense of justice still feel so out of reach? That's the core conflict we're going to dig into. To really get a grip on how we got here, we have to go right back to the beginning, to that first spark that lit a fire across the entire state of Gujarat. It all kicked off on the morning of February 27, 2002. At Godhra station, a coach on the Sabarmati Express filled with Hindu pilgrims was set on fire. 59 people, including women and children, were burned alive. It was horrific. But what happened next was crucial. By that evening, a Hindu nationalist group, the VHP, made the controversial decision to parade the victims' burned bodies through the streets of Ahmedabad and call for a statewide strike. The very next day, the state just exploded. And the retaliation that followed was swift and unbelievably brutal. In a neighborhood called Narodopatya, a mob went on a 10-hour rampage, killing 97 people. Over at the Gulbarg Society, 69 people were killed, including a former member of parliament, Ahsan Jaffrey, who was reportedly on the phone desperately calling for help that just never arrived. And in another city, Vadodara, 14 people who were hiding in the Best Bakery were burned to death. And we have to be clear here, this wasn't just widespread violence. It was marked by acts of unimaginable cruelty. Human rights groups collected testimonies, and this one from a gravedigger, well, it gives you a horrifying picture of just how brutal these attacks were. So no one denies the violence happened. But the huge question was always, was it a spontaneous outburst of anger, or was it organized? And was the government complicit in it? Well, the clues to those answers didn't come from official channels. They came from a hidden camera. A few years later, a media outlet called Tehelka released these undercover recordings, and they told a very different story. On these tapes, men who took part in the killings were caught on camera, but they weren't sorry. They were boasting about what they did, and critically, they named the people who they claimed helped them do it. The main figure in these tapes, the star of the show, if you can call him that, was a man named Babu Bajrangi. He was a leader of a group called the Bajrang Dal, and on camera, he proudly takes credit for leading the mob at Narodopatya, one of the deadliest massacres. And this right here is his most explosive claim, all caught on tape. He alleges the police were told to just stand by and do nothing. But then he goes even further, directly implicating the chief minister at the time, Narendra Modi, saying his actions had political support from the top. This confession became the smoking gun for those who argued that the riots weren't a failure of policing, but state-sponsored violence. Okay, so on one hand, you've got these stunning confessions on tape and thousands of eyewitness accounts. Now let's see how that stacks up against the official truth, the story told by the government's own investigations. You'd think with all that evidence, the tapes, the witnesses, the official investigations would be pretty straightforward, right? Well, the conclusions they came to were anything but. This split in the official story started with the very first event, the train fire. 2 different government investigations looked into it and came to completely opposite conclusions. The commission set up by the state of Gujarat said it was a pre-planned conspiracy, but a committee set up by the central government said it was likely an accident. One event, 2 conflicting official truths right from the very beginning. So that state-level Nanavati Commission eventually looked at the riots too. In its final report, it gave the state leadership a completely clean chit. It said there was no evidence any minister encouraged the violence, and it cleared then Chief Minister Narendra Modi. It basically concluded the police failed because they were just outnumbered, not because they were told to stand down. So this official report completely contradicted the claims made in those Tehelka tapes.
So, with official investigations contradicting the evidence on the ground, everything ended up in the courts. But instead of giving us clarity, the legal system often just made that divide between the two truths even wider. Just look at the case of Maya Kodnani. It perfectly captures this whole paradox. She was an MLA, and eyewitnesses accused her of leading the mob at Narodopatia. After the riots, what happened? She was promoted to a state minister. Years later, a trial court called her the kingpin of the massacre and sent her to prison. But then, on appeal, a higher court let her go, acquitting her of everything. Accused, promoted, convicted, acquitted. It's a sequence that just leaves you scratching your head, wondering what on earth to believe. And if you zoom out, the big picture of legal accountability is just as stark. After the riots, the police filed about 1,500 cases. But the number of people who were actually convicted, especially the high-profile figures, and had that conviction stick after all the appeals, that number is tiny. It shows this huge gap between the massive scale of the violence and the very small scale of the legal consequences. And finally, that brings us to the highest-ranking official who was accused. The Supreme Court appointed a special investigation team, an SIT, to look into the allegations against the Chief Minister Narendra Modi. In the end, the SIT reported that it found no prosecutable evidence against him. And with that, the legal case was closed, cementing the official version of events as the final word. So, we end up right back where we started, with two truths. The truth of the survivors and the secret tapes, and the truth of the government commissions and the courts. This quote from the family of a British citizen who was killed in the riots really captures what's at stake. 20 years later, the question of what really happened in Gujarat isn't just about the past. It's about what we all choose to remember, what we decide justice looks like, and what that means for the future.